This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel under fire, hit with a massive rocket barrage by Hamas aimed at Tel Aviv and other cities. While in New York, the UN Secretary General makes some highly controversial remarks about Israel, leading to calls for his resignation. Why Israel fights. We're going to bring you a look at just how brutal and murderous the Hamas attacks were on October 7th and what Israeli heroes have had to do in the aftermath of the assault. A U.S. senator explains why it's important not only to help Israel during this war, but also to target the main source of conflict in the Middle East, Iran. We're going to hear from Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, and how Americans are helping Israelis during their battle with their enemies by stepping in with supplies. All those stories and more are ahead today, right here on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin in Israel, where Hamas launched a massive rocket barrage Tuesday afternoon, mainly at Tel Aviv, but hitting other cities as well, as the Israeli Defense Forces are gearing up for urban warfare in the ground invasion of Gaza. And the Biden administration is preparing to evacuate Americans from the Middle East. The Washington Post reporting hundreds of thousands will need to leave if the fighting in Gaza cannot be contained. And in New York, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate ceasefire amid what he called clear violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza, and leveled accusations at Israel as well, leading to the Israeli ambassador to call for his resignation. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
The UN took center stage in the Israel-Hamas war on Tuesday, making demands on Hamas while accusing Israel of occupying the Palestinians.
Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. All hostages must be treated humanely and released immediately and without conditions. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Israel's permanent representative to the UN, Gilad Erdan, demanded the Secretary General apologize or resign.
Today, we called him to apologize. There's no justification to the existence of this building. This building was established to prevent atrocities. How can the Secretary General, with his words, justify in any way the terrible atrocities that happened to our civilians, innocent civilians?
Palestinian Authority Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki called on the UN to stop what he called the massacres against the Palestinians.
The ongoing massacres being deliberately and systematically and savagely perpetrated by Israel, the occupying power, against the Palestinian civilian population under its illegal occupation must be stopped. The Security Council has a duty to stop them. The international community is obliged, under international law, to stop them.
We all recognize the right, and indeed the imperative, of states to defend themselves against terrorism. That's why we must unequivocally condemn Hamas's barbaric terrorist attack against Israel. Babies riddled with bullets, young people hunted down and gunned down with glee, young people beheaded, families burned alive in a final embrace, parents executed in front of their children, children executed in front of their parents.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Hamas clearly started the conflict.
The president has spoken very clearly, and I think very forcefully, on who's to blame here for October 7th. It's Hamas. It's not the Israelis. It's not the innocent Israeli people that were slaughtered going to a music festival. It was Hamas. They planned this thing for many months, maybe even as long as a year. Hamas is to blame.
Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen reminded journalists about the hundreds of Israeli hostages Hamas is still holding.
We are also here to bring the voice of more than 220 people that kidnapped. I have behind part of their family that joined to the UN Council today. We say clearly and loudly, bring them home. They are civilians.
Israelis serving on the front lines say Israel is not against the Palestinians.
Hamas is a terror organization worse than ISIS. The Palestinian people doesn't have nothing to do with it. It's not their blame. It's the Hamas. We're going to destroy Hamas. We're going to kill them all. And then we're going to talk about ceasefire.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Our CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas just returned from a military base where Israeli Defense Force officials showed body cam videos from Hamas terrorists, from victims, and from first responders. George, you were there for almost 47 minutes. Describe exactly what you saw.
Yeah, from the video in total released by the IDF, mind you, it's only for the international media. It is not for the public consumption. It was about 45 minutes in length. And Ephraim, I will tell you, I have covered all the major wars of the last 30 years, from Afghanistan to Syria, to the last Hamas-Israel war, to the Hezbollah-Israel war, to the most recent war in Ukraine. And sadly, I have seen a lot of the images that I saw in this 45 minutes, men and women, children burned, people hacked to death, point blank, shot in the head, shot in the back, shot in the face. It's a warning to our viewers. What I'm going to tell you is not, it's going to be difficult to digest, but this is the reality. In the 45 minutes of the video, Ephraim, there were three particular moments that stood out in my mind. Number one, in the kibbutz Be'eri, there was a massacre there. There was video that was from a family. They had video inside their home, and suddenly you see a man with two young children in their underwear, and you can hear the fire, the gunfire going off in the background. He suddenly goes into his bomb shelter, and he gets his two children and he huddles them in the bomb shelter. And all of a sudden you see a Hamas terrorist throw a grenade right into the bomb shelter. It explodes. The father drops to his knees. He collapses to the ground. And then within a few seconds, two Hamas terrorists come into the bomb shelter, take the two children who happen to miraculously survive. They're in their underwear. They're bleeding from their head. They walk into their apartment, and you see this Hamas terrorist going to the refrigerator. He takes a bottle of water, drinks it, takes a bottle of Coca-Cola, drinks it, gone, and he tells his brother, this is not a prank, brother, this is real. Daddy has. Then a few minutes later, you see again just the anguish of these two little boys. I don't know, probably from maybe 9-10 years old. The other moment in the video was a foreign worker. I think he looked Filipino. I cannot confirm that for sure. But you see a Hamas soldier who is basically on top of him, and he takes what's equivalent to a shovel, but in Africa, they call it a hoe, and he attempts to decapitate this Filipino worker. The third most gripping moment was when a Hamas operative calls up his mother, who I assume was in the Gaza Strip, and he's exhilarated, and he's telling his mother, Mom and Dad, and he tells his dad, Mom and Dad, I've killed 10 Jews today. I've killed them. Today I'm a hero. And he says, Allahu Akbar, which is Arabic for God is great. He continues to tell his mother, I've killed 10 Jews today. Mom, I'm a hero. This is unbelievable what I'm expecting. It was just absolutely it was just horrific to watch. But sadly, as I've covered all these wars around the world, Ephraim, I'm kind of used to it.
So sad. Why is the Israeli government releasing these videos to the international press? What's the strategy?
Look, the strategy here is that, ever since October 7th, there has been this narrative in some corners of the world, in some corners of this region, that this really did not happen. And the assessment by the Israeli government is that, that the Western press and people in the broader region and around the world believe, wait a minute, why is Israel going after Hamas in such a devastating manner? Really, did this attack on October 7th happen? Well, today, the Israeli government, for the second time this week, wanted to show the Western world Look, we have body camera video from Hamas terrorists. We have body camera video from first responders as well as eyewitnesses who happened to be there, who miraculously survived the attack. This is evidence that what you saw here was Holocaust-like evil practices that were done on this community in this country back on October 7th.
All right, so painful to hear. George Thomas, thank you so much for your reporting. Stay safe. Israelis are extremely motivated to fight after the murderous Hamas attack. There are many heroes in that unfolding tragedy that happened on October 7th. Here again, our correspondent Julie Stahl, who met those whose job it was to carefully and respectfully care for the remains of those lost.
I'm in a dream right now, and it's a very bad dream. I'm not eating. I'm not sleeping. Not only me. It's my entire team that I was with them for the last 10 days.
Yossi Landau volunteers for Zaka, an Israeli paramedic search and rescue organization. His team joined other first responders in arriving quickly to the besieged areas.
We arrived to Sderot. There was still gunshots. It was a war. It's a war zone. Police, soldiers screaming in you, just go down, because it's right in back of you. There's terrorists, and you see people struggling to live. They're wounded.
Volunteers spent 11 hours collecting bodies along one stretch of road that would normally take 20 minutes to drive. And they left the burned bodies temporarily in their cars and only took those who had been shot.
That people were burned while they were alive. They got a missile, they got a grenade, and they were burned.
Landau, a 33-year Zaka volunteer who survived 9/11 in New York, described the scene at one shelter.
And we saw 20 people. They were hugging themselves, trying to defend themselves. They were all burned to death. Just two grenades.
Dozens of Zaka volunteers joined in respectfully collecting remains throughout the communities.
Those bodies that we had to take apart from that shelter were just talking to us. We only tried to defend ourselves. We didn't try to harm anybody. We came over here to enjoy ourselves, to sing. And this is what happened. They were all youngsters.
Further down the road, they found a van with 6 people dead who were not Jewish.
They were Palestinians. They were shot. It was Israeli plates. They were all shot, and we put them into the bags, the same thing, like we did to the civilians, to the Jews.
No one knows where this conflict is heading in the near future, but Israelis say the country will never be the same again. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up here at home, a Republican senator says the U.S. needs to help Israel, and beyond that, it also needs to target the primary focus in the Middle East, Iran. We're going to hear from Oklahoma Senator James Lankford when we come back.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel Live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
We're back now, taking you to Washington, D.C., where the president and lawmakers are working to send billions of dollars in aid to Israel. Senator James Lankford believes the U.S. should not only help Israel, it should also target Iran. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka spoke with the senator and brings us this report.
Don't be fooled. This is not an Israel issue. This is an Iran problem.
Oklahoma Senator James Lankford tells CBN News that's why the U.S. must immediately enforce greater sanctions against Iran.
Literally, Israel is facing violence from 3 different sides, all being funded by or stirred up by the Iranian regime. So a couple of things are pretty basic for this. The Biden administration has reduced the enforcement of the sanctions on Iran on their oil sales. So their oil sales have skyrocketed, giving a lot more money to Iran so they can send it to Hezbollah, they can send it to Hamas. That has to stop. We've got to actually enforce the sanctions that are in place.
Lankford sees the war in Israel as part of a worldwide scenario that threatens U.S. national security. Combined with the growing threat of China and Russia's continued war with Ukraine, Lankford believes the U.S. helping its allies is necessary to keep America safe. The debate now is whether to couple both Israel and Ukraine in the request.
Well, if we're going to tie those two together now, but those two both need to be done. I know there's a lot of controversy on providing aid to Ukraine. Let me make it very clear. Ukraine is currently being attacked by Russia with funding from China and weapons from North Korea and Iran. So when you have Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia together, if the United States just yawns and walks away and says that's no big deal, we're literally turning a new world order over to Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. That's a bad idea for the entire world.
The White House's $100 billion request does link the two.
Why is Joe Biden going on national television and selling people on a Ukrainian escalation when Joe Biden is talking about the terrible tragedy in Israel? Whatever your views, Sean, on Ukraine, it is a separate country and a separate problem. I think what the president did is completely disgraceful.
Strong bipartisan support still exists to help both countries.
I think it requires a worldwide approach rather than trying to take parts of it out. It's all connected. The Chinese and the Russians said they're now friends forever. Iranian drones are being used in Ukraine and against the Israelis.
There's resistance among some Republicans, including here in the Senate, about bundling things together. Is it possible to pass Ukraine aid if it's not tied to Israel?
I just think that's a mistake. I mean, I know there are some Republicans in the Senate and maybe more in the House that think Ukraine is somehow different. I view it as all interconnected.
Unless something changes, the Senate is the only chamber that can craft a funding package. That's because the House still needs a speaker, and without one, legislation can't get through Congress and to the president's desk. House Republican leaders see this as a major problem on the world stage.
I want a speaker in the chair so we can move forward and go to my issues, my Committee of War and Peace. It's too dangerous right now. The world's on fire, and this is so dangerous what we're doing. And most importantly, it's embarrassing because it empowers and emboldens our adversaries like Chairman Xi, who says, democracy doesn't work.
For what it's worth, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said over the weekend that he would have, quote, already sent aid to Israel if he still had the gavel today. The House tries again to elect a new speaker this week. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Still ahead, stepping in with supplies, we're going to look at how Americans are working to protect Israel during this time of war. We'll bring you that story right after this. As the war in Israel intensifies, people living there are coming to depend on much-needed protective gear delivered from America. CBN's Brody Carter recently spoke with some who are stepping up to keep the pipeline flowing with supplies for the Israelis who need it most.
There are roughly 270 small towns and communities with populations up to 1,000 residents scattered across Israel. You know them as a kibbutz, an agricultural hub that provides a societal norm unique to Israel. Many of them lost their sense of security when it was shattered by the recent terror attacks.
When you see a person walking with AK-47 between homes filled with children and infants, sleeping in their beds, we need to make sure that our communities are protected.
GoPro footage of Hamas gunmen attacking Israelis on October 7th shocked the world. As news of the terror spread, it triggered an effort among Americans to provide protective gear for vulnerable communities.
Our intentions is to help protect life, and that's why we're focusing on protective gear.
Tal is a former IDF soldier and Israeli-American living in Atlanta, leading the effort. He hopes to raise $20,000 for protective gear like bulletproof vests, helmets, and other safety equipment to strengthen security of roughly 60 communities in northern Israel.
Fires tend to be a big problem once rockets fall anywhere, if it's agriculture areas or open areas.
The first 9-10 days of the war, we've actually transferred over $30 million
According to Rabbi Weil, the U.S.-based nonprofit Friends of Israel Defense Forces uses donations and grants to help support soldiers by providing supplies like hygiene kits, plasma, field hospitals, and much more.
We believe there'll be 4 phases. Phase 1 is about $63 million. That's just to cover the basic emergency medical equipment.
As part of those upcoming phases, Weil says millions of dollars will go towards physical and emotional therapies for both soldiers and bereaved families. Amid a possible ground invasion of Gaza and with multiple enemies, supporters emphasize the importance of firmly standing with those defending Israel.
But it's not just Israel these young men and women are defending. Because if Israel falls, their next goal is Sunni Islam. They'll take over Mecca, take over Medina, the holy sites of Islam. But their ultimate goal, what they refer to in their terminology as the Great Satan, their ultimate goal is Western civilization.
But also for any person that sees that country, or specifically Jerusalem, as a place that is sacred and needs to be accessible, and we are willing to fight to protect it.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
An average country spends 2% of its GDP on defense. In Israel, even before the war, it spent more than 10% of its GDP on defense and security. Another reason why Israel says the support of any kind is welcomed. Amid all the war and distress in the Middle East and the word, there is still hope in the Lord. And we'll be right back again with an encouraging word for your day ahead. It's all coming up right after this. Stay with us.
Get your daily quick start from CBN News. A quick read on the important news of the day delivered right to your inbox. Stay current on breaking news, politics, and entertainment. Go to quickstart.news and subscribe today.
Time for your Wednesday word, and today's word is fight. Remember, your life isn't just flesh, it's spirit, and there is a battle beyond what you can see. It's not time to tap out. It's time to tap in and wage war in the spirit. Take back the ground the enemy thought he won. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to thank you so much for watching and remind you our programs can be found at any time on cbnnews.com. You can also find them on the CBN News channel. Thank you so much. Reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Come back right back here again tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.